Sometimes it's not easy, even here in South Africa. As much as you might have extended care paramedics who carry ventilators and all that, but sometimes those paramedics won't get to an area that is like 3 hours away.
Welcome to the EMS Global podcast. It's an unusual podcast for us because we've got a group of paramedics who have probably seen most of the systems in the world, particularly those in the areas that we focus on in EMS Global, which is the countries of low resources and high demand and post-Soviet nations. But we're joined by Elias, Thulani and Malusi, who are all come from the African continent and are now working in Australia, United Arab Emirates. They've worked in London and also obviously in South Africa. So welcome to EMS Global Podcast.
Thank you, Hamish. Thank you for having us. Absolutely privileged to be here.
And I also need to mention these guys are behind Para Podcast, which I'll put the link in the description. Para Podcast is looking at, I guess, the experiences of South African or African EMS practitioners who are now working elsewhere in the world and why they decided to transition to other systems. I'll start with you, Elias. Could you just tell us, in a few words about Para Podcast and what you're trying to achieve there?
Well, basically, the thing started off as initiatives to really just educate paramedics about paramedicine, sort of like in different parts of the world and how we got to positions where we are, and sort of like what is it like transitioning from one position to the next, what are the challenges, so that you can basically just share stories and learn from each other. And then we thought, what, let's transition into especially the well-established individuals. How can they share their story so that perhaps someone can look back at this and say, actually, I want to follow in their footsteps, or I want to do that, or I want to work in Australia, for instance, like where Malusi is. How can I go about it? And then there can be a community where you can reach out to and actually be supported. That's how it has initially started off. But I think now we're branching into management. We're trying to understand, what is paramedicine like in Zimbabwe? What is paramedicine like in Nigeria? What is paramedicine like anywhere pretty much in the world and in Africa? Africa does not seem like it's doing much in terms of paramedicine. But then, because we don't do a lot of research, but there's a lot happening.
Well, I mean, that's a really good point to kick off our podcast is what is happening in Africa as far as EMS is concerned. Yes, there's not a lot of research published, but from our understanding, there's a lot more research being done now. Thulani, could you just take us through what your observations are of Africa as it is now, and maybe what's improved or changed over maybe the last 5 years?
When I started as a student to where I am now, I've seen some progressive change. And some of those changes that I've seen that are I'm seeing now is that back then, for example, when you had to go to cases, you never had a GPS. People used to use a map book just to try and navigate to the street. People used to write down their street address, the case number, the type of case that they're going to. Whereas now we've got computer-aided systems that do all of that. But also, if you look at some of the training that has existed over the years, is that I can tell you about South Africa, for instance, is that we've moved from certificate-based training to more of professionalization, where some of the short courses have been phased out to more aligning with NQF-aligned courses, university-based courses, so that it aligns with not just locally, but international standards, so that people can be able to function elsewhere. And also, I think the main thing is that with the short courses that existed, is that people were unable to progress from one, if you've got a certificate course, it was difficult for you to apply to a university where you can do a degree because you didn't meet the requirements. Whereas now, with the professionalization, we are moving from one course that allows you to start from basic university training and progresses you to up until you get a degree to even a master's. So those are the changes that we've seen. And although it might feel that it's slow, but it's in line with the times.
So it's very much about better education. Is that basically in South Africa, or is that generally across the continent?
So I think one of the things that Elias spoke about is that, as part of the Para podcast, is that we want to take paramedicine from Africa to the world. And one of the things that we've done is that we've had conversations with EMS people, EMS leaders, EMS practitioners across the world. When I was still young, I used to be fascinated by the lights and sirens. And back then, we used to have ambulance drivers. Whereas now we've got practitioners, we've got people that are able to provide treatment, stabilize the patient, and transport the patient to hospital from basic to advanced care support, you know. So that, for instance, is not just uniquely in South Africa, but also in African countries. But it's just that it's not well documented. And that's one of the things that we're trying to aim is to document these stories. Elias is from Namibia, I'm from South Africa. Those conversations that we are having are going to be meaningful, and people can have reference to, okay, there's something happening in Namibia, there's something happening in Zimbabwe. Let's go have a look. How are they doing? What are they doing? How can we implement it? How can we learn from each other?
So it's really moving together, the countries, and collaborating, improving their education of their paramedics. What about equipment? For example, in our experience in Mongolia, we've got doctors on the ambulance who are working with no equipment. Some have no oxygen, there's no splints, there's none of the basic equipment, although it's improving, but still it's very much lacking in equipment. What about across Africa?
54 countries, each country has its level of developmental needs and their own structure on how they do things. Yeah. So it's important to establish that first. And then possibly the sub-Saharan Africa, which is where we are from, the southern parts of Africa, there are different levels of development that they have. Sometimes we South Africans, we talk like everything is perfect in this country, but sometimes it's not, because you do have issues even in the rural areas where you do not have an immediate ambulance at least for 2 hours because of the terrain, the road, and it's just hard to drive over there. So sometimes it's not easy, even here in South Africa. As much as you might have extended care paramedics who carry ventilators and all that, but sometimes those paramedics won't get to an area that is like 3 hours away. So it's different regions, different challenges all together, and different levels of training and different resources. And sometimes even human resources may be an issue. Because I think we had from, I think it was Kenya, where they still have the nurses that needs to be called out in hospital to jump in the ambulance so that they could attend to a case, you know. So there's an issue with human resources, training, and getting ambulance systems functioning like in the rest of the world. So it's really vast and just different in all the sense.
Elias, if I can ask you, the message here is that Africa is improving. What is driving that improvement? Is it public expectations of EMS in Africa? Is it the paramedics themselves who want to provide a better service? Is it the government policy? What is actually behind the improvements that you've seen?
I would like to say government policies, but sometimes the government doesn't come on board, and sometimes they just do not fund the services at all. But I think it's the expectation from the public, and I think also just a lot of private sector. I think most of it is private sector driven, and I think they want to improve the quality of care that they are giving. And if you have 3 or 4 ambulances that are competing in the same state, for instance, everyone wants to up their game so they can attract more clients. And I think this is a system that's very different. Like, for instance, when you're in New Zealand, right, there's only St. John's, and you're not really going to get any other competition. But when it's private based, everyone wants to render like a different level of care. But overall, I think it's just people are learning from each other. Like Malusi and Thulani have highlighted that EMS is very different in Kenya, for instance, South Africa, but they are learning, and I would like to think South Africa is probably the big brother of EMS in Southern Africa for reference. And I think a lot of the people have seen what South Africa has done in terms of moving from short courses to, like, having critical care paramedics. And I think the degree program started mostly in South Africa, and now it's spreading to Namibia, it's spreading to Botswana, and it's spreading to, I'm not sure what's really happening in Angola. We have not covered that. And I think pretty much because it's mostly a Portuguese speaking nation. But I think it's the countries learning from each other, and it's sort of just spreading out.
Let's now look at, if we can, your experiences. You've come from the African EMS and moved to various countries. I'm really keen to know what you think you've brought to those countries in your experience of Africa. We'll start with you, Elias, again. Can we just go through, just briefly, where you were working in Africa and where you went to, and what did you think you brought as part of the Elias package of a paramedic to that service?
It takes me back a little bit. So right before I moved to the UK, I was working. So I basically graduated, worked on the road for 1 year, and then I went back to the training institution where I graduated from. And then I was expected to teach these students, but then I kind of felt, or at least be part of the teaching cadre. And I felt like I wasn't ready. I felt like I was inexperienced. And I felt like most of the cases that I was giving to the students were mostly textbook based. And I thought to myself, hey, listen, I kind of need to go out there and learn something. And I think London Ambulance was recruiting at the time. I wanted to experience a different system. I wanted to see what are they doing. And then you get there and they'll, for instance, use a tourniquet once, right? And then dispose it. Which is like, why are you doing that? Or like, for instance, they'll use a BBM once and then they'll dispose it after a cardiac arrest. And you're like, really? Is this? I mean, we reuse this stuff, but and I think it's mentally, it's a little bit difficult to get out of that state of mind of where you're so resourced. Obviously, you don't have as many resources as you did, or as you're doing at the moment. So it becomes a bit of a struggle trying to adjust. It's really a transition from where you're under resourced. I'm sure you working in Mongolia, you'd know that some people might need to reuse the laryngoscopes, for instance. I saw them just using a laryngoscope once to open the airway, and that's it. They'll discard it. And I was like, are you not gonna clean that and, I don't know, get it back into the system? No. So I think there's been that challenge that you see. Then you're like, mentally, you kind of have to readjust yourself and try and get into the way of things.
On that note, then, Thulani, protocols, as you guys know, are not as rigid in resource constrained settings. Elias, you just basically spoke about that in your experiences with the equipment. But then you go to a high income system, and protocols are very important. Your scope of practice is set right there, and you cannot go outside your scope of practice unless you get permission and all those sorts of things. So when you're going to work in a different country, how do you match what you could have done in Africa to what you're not allowed to do maybe in the country you're going to? Thulani, would you like to comment around that?
Sure, certainly. I think one of the biggest things that we need to understand that as nomadic people that we've moved from one country to another. Well, I haven't moved to a lot of countries, but I've moved from South Africa to Qatar. Is that when you move from one place to another, you need to be able to be adaptable. You need to be able to learn how different systems work wherever you're moving from. Okay, and you have to do what the system is doing. You have to learn, you have to go through the training in order to understand what the system, how it functions and how it works. So for me, is that moving from one place to another, is that you have to be able to be adaptable. You have to be able to appreciate the system that you're moving into, with all its challenges and all its benefits. I mean, it might be improved, it might not be improved, but you need to be able to function as a team. You can't go there and just all of a sudden you just want to change. You have to learn about the system, be part of the system, be part of the team. And then once you form part of the team and you're comfortable enough, then you can start maybe voicing your opinions or how to improve the system. But the biggest thing is that you have to be adaptable, and find comfort, because where you're coming from is that there might be like some resource constraints, and there might be the fact that you have to be, what's the word? There was improvisation with the equipment that you had where I was, but when you move abroad, is that you've got everything that you need, and now the things that you need to find or that you need to rely on is making critical care decisions when you've got those patients that are in front of you. So all of that, in essence, is that you have to be adaptable. You have to be able to learn the systems, how they work, and be a team player and function in that system. And also the biggest thing is that obviously it's a big culture shock when you move from one country to another, whether you're from South Africa to UAE, even if you go to the US, it's a different culture shock. So you have to be able to, as an individual, function in those systems and be part of the team.
Might be a difficult question, but what do you think high income services, the American, the London, Australian, everywhere else, those services can learn from Africa or from South Africa? I'm happy for anybody to respond, anybody to answer. I know you're all thinking about that, but anybody would like to venture a point?
I think Malusi and Elias would be better for this.